Welcome, everyone. I am Barbara Fisher. I am the Capital Grant Administrator here at MHT. You are joining us today for the Easement Q&A webinar. This is the third webinar we are doing in a series to promote the Historic Preservation Capital Grant Program at MHT. We are also joined today by a few of my colleagues. I'm going to ask them now to turn on their videos and their microphones so they can introduce themselves. And we'll start with Charlotte Lake.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Charlotte Lake. I'm the Capital Grant and Loan Program Administrator at MHT, and I'm going to turn things over now to Casey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Casey DeHaven. I am the Easement Administrator here at MHT, and so I will largely oversee project review processes with the easement program, as well as, conducting inspections and dealing with our grants team.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sally Sharples. I am the easement processor. I will be the point of contact between you and legal department on putting the easements through, making sure we get the due diligence information that we need, and drafting and processing the easement.
And later on, we will have Kate Jaffe joining us. She used to be Casey. As the easement administrator, she's now overseeing our department, and she'll be joining us later to help us answer some questions and give some additional information. So to get started, I will be presenting first on how the easement requirement for this program can affect your grant timeline, and what we need from you on the grant side of things as far as the application goes for the easement. Then I will pass it on to the easement staff, who will provide information on how to convey the easement, the required documentation, and more. So program basics. The basic necessities for this project is that this program is that it's a capital funded grant program. This is construction related projects only related to historic properties. We have an allocation of $600,000 each year, which makes this grant program extremely competitive. For example, last year we had almost $3 million in requested funds and grant applications. To give you an idea of how competitive it is, we can only give a maximum grant amount of $100,000, and we recommend at least a $10,000 minimum request for the grant, but we can also, work with you if it's a little less than that. And some dates to remember for the application this year. The application goes live on our grants webpage on February 8th, and it will close on March 22nd at 11:59 p.m. This application is online only. We don't receive hard copies of it, and we will include in the chat a link to that website and put those dates in the chat again as well. So, what is an easement? There are different types of easement, but for our purpose, a preservation easement is a legal contract that you would have between you and MHT. It's the property owner in MHT, and it provides for the protection of historic architectural and archaeological features and significance on your site. The easement is recorded in local land records. That's just something to keep in mind. So the easement is required as part of the Historic Preservation Capital Grant Program. This is in our regulations. This is not something that is negotiable. It's a requirement, and if you were to be awarded grant funds, the property owner would have to convey an easement to MHT. So when you submit an application, we kind of start the easement process at the application point by requiring the property owner's consent to do the project. This includes their understanding that an easement is required if the project is awarded funds. We do this by requiring a letter of property owner consent. Without this letter, this signed letter, your application will not be considered for the grant program. So you must attach this as part of your application. Even if the owner and the grantee of the property are the same, and even if your property already has an easement with MHT, you still need this letter to be a part of your application. A template for this letter is on our website for download. and it must be signed by the owner before you attach it to the application. We ask that you please confirm the owner is correct in SSTAT, which is the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. Here is a link to that website. We recommend doing this now and not waiting until later in case the property owner in SSTAT needs to be revised. As part of our threshold review of applications, we will check for this. It is a legal requirement. So please search for your property and know that if you can't find yourself, then we probably can't find you either. And so what is in SSTAT needs to match what is in your application and on the property owner consent letter. So here is our website, and under the circle with the arrow, you can see where it's pointing to the property owner consent template. This is a Word document that you can download. You can attach your own letterhead to it if you like, and you just fill in the areas that are pertinent to your property and your property owner. In the circle are also other documents that if you're applying this year, you will want to look through or download. The grant guidelines will help you fill out your application. There's a sample application from last year on our website, just to give you an idea of what to expect for this year's application. There's also an Excel spreadsheet, such as a sample budget. You will need to provide this as part of your application as well. And then at the bottom there, there's the Quick Start Guide, which will help you use our grant portal to submit your application. So what to know as a grantee? Once you're awarded a grant and you become a grantee, it is important to know that grant funds are not dispersed until the easement is conveyed. So this may add to your project timeline, and it's something to keep in mind when planning your project and filling out your application. It is important to know that grant staff and easement staff will begin coordinating on your project once funds are awarded. Easement staff and the easement committee will review the description, your project description from your application, and they could slightly change once the easement committee has reviewed it. Just for example, they may require, like a structural assessment in addition to your project, or they may require a different mortar type than what was suggested in our application. So overall, your project's not going to change due to their review, but the review is just to ensure that the work is done right and to the standards. And lastly, please note that grant funds are not eligible to use for paying fees for conveying the easement. This is, such as legal fees or anything else that's involved with completing conveying the easement. So now I will pass this on to easement staff, and they will give you some more information on what happens once you have been awarded the grant and how to convey the easement.
All right, thanks, Barbara. So once we start kicking things off as far as the easement is concerned, the overall scope of the easement can vary from property to property, and this is going to be catered to the individual property and what areas will be protected at that property. And so the easement can protect the exterior and interior of the historic building and structures, as well as surrounding landscape and any associated archaeological resources that might be present on the property. And then this can also include any mixture of these protected areas. So some easements only protect the exterior, while some protect both exterior and interior. And it just depends on what the property is and what is significant and what historic fabric is still intact at that property. And then typically with multiple grants, there are always these kinds of different requirements depending on the grant that you were awarded. And so in the case of the MHT capital grant, it is required that if you are awarded the capital grant, then there will be a conveyance of an easement on your property for a fixed term of years, which is typically between 15 to 20 years for these grant-funded properties. Next slide, please. So what are the owner's responsibilities? And so in conveying an easement property to MHT, you are therefore agreeing as the property owner to seek MHT's approval for any of these proposed changes to the property before any of that work is undertaken. And this is work that is to occur at any of the protected areas of the property, or for instance, if there is a and we can get more about this if you have questions about the overall scope of our review as far as easements are concerned later. But if any work to an area that is not protected by the easement is going to affect an area that is protected by the easement, that constitutes a change to the protected feature that will also require review from the easement program. As part of conveying an easement, you are also agreeing to relinquish partial development rights to your property. Typically, all of our easements contain, a clause that is going to basically dictate if you can or cannot, construct additional structures on the property, or, you cannot demolish parts of the property, and you cannot make unnecessary additions to the protected structures on the property. Typically, the easements also provide limited public access. And so we can get more into this if you have questions about the language in the easement that talks about, requiring public access to the property. And then, so there is also, in all easements, standard language requires that you maintain the property in good condition. And then this also means, therefore, the MHT staff, typically the easement staff, will come onto the property to conduct inspections at fairly regular intervals. And so there are a lot of easement properties that the easement program at MHT manages. And so we typically are able to come out and do the inspection just to make sure that as a property owner, you are maintaining the property and that it is in compliance with the easement. Next slide. And so more about proposed changes and alterations. So as easement staff, when we are conducting our review on our end, what we are looking for is if you have a proposed change or alteration to your property and to the protected areas of your property, then we usually require that you submit to us a change alteration application, which you can find on our website, and I would be happy to share with anybody after. And so typically when you fill out the application, you then submit that to us along with any necessary details about the project that would be helpful for us in our review. And then we will review the project. We do have an easement committee. And so we present the project to that easement committee. And the committee is made up of members of MHT staff, and we all have varying backgrounds of specialty, whether it's other members of our easement program or members of our tax credit and grant program. We have architectural historians and archaeologists on our program who staff the easement committee. And so we are able to then review the project, and the director of MHT will then make a final ruling on that project, and we will then follow up with the property owner with that decision. And that will be either an approval of the project or a denial of the project, because maybe we are looking for alternative materials, or maybe we are looking or suggesting alternative methods to what was proposed initially by the property owner, or alternative materials that maybe we would like to see instead. And all of this is reviewed under and using the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. And so this is just kind of a basic outline of how we approach our review for all of these preservation-oriented changes and alterations to these historic fabric or to these historic properties, to ensure that there is no, ulterior adverse effect that is going to, negatively affect the historic fabric of these properties. Next slide, please. And so here is the easement conveyance. And so I will hand this over to Sally Sharples, and she will go over this process with you.
Thanks, Casey. So MHT uses a boilerplate document to create a deed of easement, which includes the provisions of the deed of easement, which have been board approved, so they can't be changed. Exhibit A is a written property description. Exhibit B is a site plan. And Exhibit C is a schedule of baseline photographs. So what this means is that Exhibit A, the legal description, has to match the site plan. So, for example, if you have measurements on the site plan, that has to be described in the legal description and signed off by the surveyor who did the site plan. Exhibit C, the schedule, means that we will come out and take photographs of the property and set that up as a schedule. You will then get a set of these to hold so that you can see, at the time that the easement is done, what the property or the areas of the property that we're looking at look like. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so MHT prepares the easement document. To develop a final draft, the following items are required. And you will, when the grant is approved, you'll receive a checklist from us, and we're always available to go through this with you. Sometimes it looks a little difficult, sometimes it can be very confusing, but what we're looking for is a title insurance policy is the first thing. And that is sometimes where there is some confusion, because for many properties there is no existing title insurance policy. Title insurance is a retroactive type of insurance policy. And if you have one on the property, you can see if you can find one. If you bought the property fairly recently, you may have one. It would be called an owner's title insurance policy. If you do have one, then all you need is a property and judgment report, which can be prepared by a title insurance company. If you don't have one, which is the majority of cases, you would need to talk to a title insurance company and let them know what we're looking for. And then it depends what their underwriter is prepared to offer. So often it's either a sort of specific easement policy, or sometimes they'll think of it as a lender's title insurance policy. But the first thing to do is make sure that the title company that you look at understands what their requirements are. So they will prepare what is called a title insurance commitment and send that to us, along with copies of any of the documents that might have an impact on the title. So, for example, any easements or right-of-ways, we would need to see copies of those. And we will liaise with the title insurance company on this commitment. When we receive it, it goes to legal and they check it, and there may well be questions come back. So this is where things can often take some time. So the title insurance is the main thing, is to make sure that you liaise with the title company to get that set up. Second major thing is to get a legal property description and a scaled site plan. Those two things go together. If you already have a survey of the property, you can submit that and we can see whether that is sufficient. Sometimes it won't be the entire property, in which case we'll need a smaller site plan drawn up based on the scope that the easement committee decides upon. So that's another thing that has to come to us. And then the hazard insurance policy, which we need to be added as additionally insured. So the two major things are title and survey and site plan are the things that normally take the time. And once we get those, then I review them and I send them over to legal, review them with legal. They usually have questions. They may have things they need to be revised, but that's how the process works. Okay, next slide, please. So the additional requirements, again, this depends on the type of organization. The corporate resolution, you will have actually done one as part of the grant process. So this doesn't require a separate resolution, because the resolution that you'll be filling out for the grant does encompass the granting of an easement as well. So the printout of the Certificate of Good Standing, that comes off the SDAT website for businesses, and we can help you with that. Again, articles of incorporation, bylaws. This is what's needed, for the organization. So whether it's a corporation or a limited liability company, those will be slightly different, but you need to check those for your organization and make sure we have that information. The other thing is a letter of determination of the tax exempt status, which you should also have, and we would need that too. Okay, next slide. The easement runs with the land, which means that present and future owners are bound by the easement requirements for the length of the term easement. So if you sell the property, you need to make sure that this is advised to any prospective purchaser, and there is a requirement that goes into the deed that specifies that the property is subject to an easement, so it's pointed out. So you would need to, again, make sure that any future buyer is aware of the easement. Okay, next question. Well, next slide, sorry.
So this is just the website address for the easement program. I've also included in the chat the link to the Historic Preservation Capital Grant Program website and the link to the easement program website, so you can peruse those in your free time and read all of that good information. And if you have any questions about the grant itself, please contact me. Here is my contact information. And again, the website for our grant program. And then also, this is Casey DeHaven's contact information. If you have any questions about the grant, she would be your, the first one to contact. And then if she needs to contact Sally or legal or Kate, we'll get into that. And also here is the webpage for the easement program. And just to clarify one thing that Sally had said about the term of the easement, and maybe Casey or Sally, you can clarify this for me. As a grant, it's not a in perpetuity term. It's a shorter term. So if you were to sell the property within the time that you have the easement, it would be conveyed to the next property owner. But how does it work, Casey and Sally, when the time has ended for the easement? How does that transition work?
I can answer this one. If the term is a 20-year term, the easement is then terminated. So we then record a termination of easement in land records. So that would then come off the title. So you could convey it free and clear of the easement once the term is finished.
And is that something that MHT initiates, or is that on the property owner? Well, MHT would be the one that would, draft the termination, and then the property owner would sign it. MHT would then record it. Okay.
And if it could be done as part of the transaction if it was being sold, the title company may well record along with the deed so that it would be terminated before the deed was recorded. But if it was done prior to a sale, if somebody had a property and the term had expired, they could ask us to terminate the easement at that stage so that the property would be free and clear when they come to sell.
And when it comes to, maybe Casey, you can answer this question. When it comes to and additional state funds are, in place during, or maybe even after the term is over for the current grant, can you explain a little bit how the additional, how you review easements kind of in general, and how we get kind of those easements, and how if they get additional state funding, there could be another easement or continuation of their easement?
Right. So I think I touched on it briefly before, but MHT does have multiple avenues for funding available through different kinds of grants. And then it's just kind of one of those things that if you're more interested in exploring that, then definitely get in touch with our grants team, and they'll be able to kind of figure out what would maybe work best for your specific situation and your specific property and circumstance. But technically, and that's one of the things I wanted to touch on, so I'll backtrack just a little bit. I think that, Barbara, you and I had both touched on that too, but it's important to note that with the MHT Capital Grant, if you are in fact awarded the MHT Capital Grant and you are notified that you are an awardee of the grant, at that moment we consider the property to be essentially under easement now, even though the easement has not yet been legally recorded. And so therefore, with the project that you're planning to do at the property, we will then, on the easement side of things, we will then review that project, even though the easement is not yet recorded, but we will treat it as though it is. And so therefore, any of the work that is proposed at the property will then still need to come to easements for review and approval before any of that work is undertaken at the property. And so that's pretty typical with any of these funding opportunities and grant programs that we have available to property owners. And that's usually a stipulation of being awarded any of these grants or tax credits, which I see Kate has joined us as well. And so Kate would be able to touch more on tax credit opportunities and state funding opportunities and what would be available to property owners there. But that is typically the way that we approach our review process is is kind of a standard issue. If you're unsure if a project is something that is protected under the easement or if it requires review and approval, just reach out to me for a quick gut check, and I would be more than happy to kind of let you know, you're like, this is something that easement committee would want to look at, or this is something that is not adversely affecting any protected features of the property, or is not specifically mentioned in the easement, and that's not something that would require a review. And I'd be happy to clarify that with anybody based on what the language is for your individual easement property. But Kate, if you would want to touch on maybe some tax credits and state funding opportunities.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. I'm Kate Jaffe. I'm the administrator of Preservation Financial Incentives. I had been Kate Velasky, so you might remember my name. I had been the easement administrator before Casey, so I'm very familiar with this whole process. And just to touch back to Barbara's question about what would happen if you do get more funding. So if you get a capital grant and you have it for about 10 years, and then you apply for another capital grant, or you apply for one of our heritage area grants or the African American Preservation Program grant, that would tack on more years to your easement term. So it would, I believe it's $5,000 per year. So it just depends on how much funding you're awarded and at what point you are in your current term, and we would figure that all out for you. But just know that if you would get another state grant, it could even be a state bond bill, that would increase your term amount. If you are interested in tax credits, that does not add any time to your easement. It's just another funding source that you can research depending on the property that you own. We have a homeowner tax credit right now, where a lot of times if you get a grant and you have an easement, many times you also can qualify for these tax credits, which would give you 20% back on qualified costs. And we can give you the website for that as well, or contact me directly for more information there. But it would involve a same type of review process, submitting an application, working with our office before you start work, just to make sure everything's approved. We kind of try to streamline that process if you are under easement, because so many similar items are required.
Thanks, Kate. I just wanted to make everyone aware that there were other, funding sources, and that there's other ways that can add maybe time to your easement term if you were to choose some of those other funding sources. If you have any questions about those, please contact Casey, and she can get you in touch with the correct funding source contact at our office. And also, just to reiterate, really from the get-go, easement staff and grant staff start to coordinate together on your property. We reach out to easement staff to know if the property already has an easement, and that helps us kind of inform more about your application. And then, as soon as a property is awarded a grant, we really start coordinating with easement staff on, what the project will be. And really, we help usher, the grantee through that easement committee approval process. That can take time, some weeks, maybe a few months, depending on if you need to come back to easement committee. So just keep those things in mind when you are working out your project timeline, which is something we ask for you to outline to us in our application. Just kind of consider that time. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to add any into the chat. I don't see any questions in the chat. If someone else does, please let me know and we can answer those questions. But if there aren't any more questions, then we will, go ahead and sign off and just say thank you all for joining us today. And please contact us if you have any questions. These slides will be up on the website. And we have recorded a webinar today, and so we do plan on adding that to the website as well. So thank you to my other colleagues for joining us today. We really appreciate it.